When Jacob blessed his 12 sons, the children of Israel, he gave each of them particular blessings, which over time became the symbols of their house. So where do we find all these Israelite symbols today? Well, all amongst the European symbols, heraldry and coat of arms. Could there be a link? Could we be the same people as the Old Testament, the people that God promised he would bless above all others? Let's compare them all and let's see what we can find out. Originally, before entering the lands of Canaan, the tribes were split into 4 camps, all surrounding the tabernacle of Moses and the Levites. So each camp had 3 tribes, with one being the head dominant tribe of that camp. There were 4 main symbols, one for each camp, those being the lion, the man, the bull, and the eagle. God commanded that the tribes take these symbols and make them into banners. However, they also began to take prophecies and blessings given to their tribes and turning them into their own distinct tribal symbols to set themselves apart. Before we begin, it's clear the tribes are spread all throughout our European nations, and certain nations do seem to fulfill certain prophecies, such as Ephraim and Britain. So there must at least be a cluster of Ephraim within Britain, but no doubt Ephraim are also spread everywhere in our nations. The main point is that these symbols have been right under our very noses this whole time. The sheer volume and scale, along with many other proofs, show that we are the true descendants of the Israelites. So, starting with Reuben, he had 3 main symbols, those being the primal man, the unstable water, and also the mandrake, which is often an overlooked one. The man symbol, as we said earlier, was because the tribe of Reuben were the head of the southern camp, so that became theirs. The water symbol, the blue-white watery stripes, was part of Reuben's prophecy that he or his descendants would be as unstable as water, and we will get to that. Lastly, the mandrake is from where Reuben gave his mother Leah a mandrake flower, which she used to bribe Rachel to conceive another son with Jacob. It's typically called the fleur de lis, which means the lily flower. However, the only blue lily flower is in the Middle East or South Africa. Now, the mandrake is a blue-purple color and the buds are yellow during the summer, and this symbol looks identical to it. So lily flower or mandrake, whatever you want to call it, I would contend that this is the symbol of Reuben. The early Frankish kings such as Charlemagne around 700 AD in his heraldry had the mandrake, so it's a very old symbol, but it's said to go back even further than that, which is no surprise. So a few examples. Of course, the symbol is all over the French flag and heraldry, on the flag of Quebec and throughout Europe. For the primal man symbol, it's often a supporter, so on the side, such as in the Danish one. Notice the Iceland coat of arms, the man, along with all the other Israelite symbols. Then lastly, the unstable waters. This one you could argue that the symbol just represents a lake or a river, but again, look at how many other Israelite symbols we see used in conjunction. So, for prophecies, Reuben was the beginning of my strength, of dignity and power. Was France not the beginning of the Christian nations? Charlemagne dominated with the First Empire, but just after it says, you will not excel or have preeminence. In other words, it wouldn't last forever. By the time of Napoleon's empire, he practically encompassed all the white world, reaching as far as Russia and even influencing America. And what happened? He was defeated, and in turn, Britain with the British Empire took over and expanded, essentially taking that firstborn birthright and becoming the new superpower, followed after by America. Reuben had the first birthright but lost it to Joseph's 2 sons. Does this not correlate perfectly with our Old Testament ancestors? So next, Simeon, he had 2 symbols. Firstly, the sword and also the castle, sometimes a tower or a gate. The sword came from Jacob's prophecy of the wrath of Simeon and Levi for when they sought revenge for their sister and slew all the males of a village. The castle represented the scattering of Simeon, as they, like Levi, were to be scattered amongst the other tribes. Simeon, however, was given portions of land within Judah, so they had their own cities and territories, so therefore the castle symbol was appropriate. This means we'd expect to find these symbols amongst and in conjunction with the the other tribes. So the castle symbol is especially prominent in Spain, Portugal and Gibraltar, but we must remember Spain very early on was overrun as early as 700 AD and struggled to return to Christianity for a very long time. For the sword, you especially see this one combined, such as an eagle holding a sword, like on the Irish coat of arms, or sometimes a lion holding a sword. But then again, this is no surprise, as Simeon would be scattered amongst the other tribes. On to Levi. He had one symbol, and that was the breastplate, the 12 stones of Israel representing each tribe. The breastplate was of course because Levi was given the Levitical priesthood, and they wore them. Levi was also spread amongst the tribes, but as the priests. However, these symbols never appeared as coat of arms. This is because Levi, although they were all across Europe like the other tribes, they were actually the ancient Druids. When the Israelites began spreading and colonizing Europe, they brought with them these Levitical priests, and over time they simply got known as Druids. They are most known as being in Britain, however originally they were in fact all over Europe. The Romans outlawed Druidism and gradually began to purge it within the empire. The last safe haven was Britain, but once Christ came there was no longer a need for the Levitical priesthood, and the same with Druids. They all became Christians, and so the 12-stone symbol disappeared. Next up, Judah. He had but one primary symbol, and that was the lion. However, there's more to it, as there were two separate tribes of Judah. So you have the blood-red lion, or sometimes instead the blood-red hand, and alternatively King David's harp, the first Judah king. So the lion symbol again was from the eastern camps, which Judah was the head of. Now Judah had twin sons Zerah and Pharez. Zerah inherited the greater birthright because his hand came out first, and it was covered in blood, so that became the symbol, the blood-red hand or blood-red lion. Pharez had the second birthright, and amongst his descendants was King David, and that's where we get the harp, which was his personal symbol when he played it for King Saul. The lion symbol is everywhere in the monarchies, the harp mostly in Ireland. It's interesting that the British monarchy has both the red lion and David's harp, showing that they have both bloodlines, Zerah and King David's. The blood hand is a bit rarer, we especially see it in Irish and Scottish heraldry. Again, red lion, we do see it here and there throughout Europe. For prophecies, virtually every king in Europe uses that lion symbol, and every kingdom always has. Is this not the kings of Judah ruling over the children of Israel or Europeans? Even the ruling scepter of Judah is typically used by the monarchies, and even in the heraldry you often see that, like an eagle holding a scepter. The coronation ceremony of Queen Elizabeth is exactly the same as King David's, it's still there. Even the Stone of Destiny, or Jacob's pillar, the one our main ancestor slept on, that the kings of Judah were to be coronated on, has passed on as well, all the way through to Ireland, to Scotland and to England. For Dan, he probably has the most symbols out of all the tribes, those being the eagle, the snake, the scales, and the rider tumbling backwards. The eagle was the sign of the northern camp, so another one of the four primary symbols. The snake was Jacob's prophecy, the first half, that Dan would leave a viper's trail wherever they went. The scales simply comes from the name Dan, which means to judge, but also the prophecy that he would judge our people. And the rider was again Jacob's prophecy, the second part, that Dan would bite at the rider's heel, causing it to tumble backwards. So the eagle is the most prominent to have survived, and we can see it just about everywhere, like all the European shields such as Poland and Germany have it. Sometimes the eagle and snake would get combined into a hybrid animal like the Wessex Weaven, which is an eagle with a serpent-like body. So for prophecies, the Viper's Trail was wherever Dan went, they would name the location after their patriarch Dan, and you can see that with many rivers, cities, all across Europe. Denmark literally means Dan's mark or frontier. Its people are called the Danes. In their ancient legends, their ancestor was called Dan. Now, a lot of the Vikings were in fact Danes, and did they not cause a lot of Christian Europe to tumble backwards, at least initially? but this had the positive effect of forcing those to rally together under a Christian king, such as King Alfred, and putting all their faith in God. Lastly, the Nordic countries were last of the European nations to finally convert to Christianity, so I have awaited your salvation, I believe, is referring to this. So Naphtali only had one primary symbol, and that was the stag, the deer or hind. This is another one of Jacob's prophecies that Naphtali would be a hind let loose. The stag symbol again we see all across Europe, especially on surnames, and often frequently as supporters on the sides of heraldry. On to Gad, he had two symbols, those being a troop, as in an armed rider, or a military style tent or camp. Both symbols come from the word Gad, which means troop, and also the prophecy that Gad would be a troop, although the camp symbol rarely ever got used today. This troop symbol is very common in the East, especially Russia, where it's on the actual national coat of arms, as well as Lithuania, as well as cities and provinces all over. The tribe of Asher had two primary symbols, the royal cup and the olive tree. The cup was from the initial part of Jacob's prophecy of Asher yielding royal dainties, whilst the olive tree, it doesn't appear much, but it was from Moses' prophecy of their lands that they would conquer in Canaan would be abundant in olive oil, and then later that they would mine the iron and brass, which we will get to. The cup you see appearing quite often, quite subtly, in a few national coat of arms, almost in the background, and especially amongst the Nordic countries. Now for prophecies, the Phoenicians were primarily from the northern tribes. The main cities of the Phoenicians were Tyre and Sidon, which were within the tribe of Asher's territory. They colonized a lot of Europe, such as Carthage, and these were all Israelites. They reached as far up as England and Ireland, so this is where we get the iron mines of Spain and tin mines of England. For example, this shows how Asher would become rich because of these minerals. So Issachar, he had but one symbol, the donkey. This was the prophecy that Issachar would find a pleasant land and settle there, but it would be between two burdens and he would be forced to submit like a donkey. Interestingly, the donkey symbol appears mostly throughout Germany and the East European countries, for surnames mostly Polish ones, and for prophecies considering that these lands are in between the powers of the West, i.e. Europe, and East, i.e. Russia. Does it not fit perfectly that these lands are couching down between two huge burdens? Zebulon also just had one symbol, and that being the boat or ship. This is once again from Jacob's prophecy that Zebulon would dwell at the haven of the sea. In other words, they would typically be seafarers with plenty of ports and harbours, so the boat symbol was very appropriate. The symbol, you could argue, is just what any fishing village you'd expect them to have, but again we got lions, eagles, all entwined. It appears on the New Zealand, most notably, coat of arms. Now Holland, the old crest of the Dutch Republic, was a ship where you had the 7 shields for each province. What's interesting is Moses gave a blessing that Zebulon would suck of the abundance of the seas and of the treasures hidden in the sand. It's interesting that over a third of Holland used to be under the sea until they claimed it and turned it into land with their dike system. Also, Rotterdam is the busiest harbour in the world, so Holland certainly is a seafaring nation. Now Ephraim had 3 symbols, the first being the bull, also the unicorn, or alternatively simply the horn. The bull symbol was the last of the 4 primary symbols from the camps of the West. The horn and unicorn come from Moses' prophecy that one day Ephraim with his horns would push the children of Israel to the ends of the earth along with his brother Manasseh, and we will get to that. The bull symbol, like the other main symbols we see everywhere all over Europe, but it's interestingly the character John Bull, who was a nationalistic type symbol in England. For the unicorn, most notable, it's in the United Kingdom's heraldry, a unicorn on one side and a lion on the other. So for prophecies, Ephraim was promised he'd have a double portion and one day be a company of nations. The only nation to accomplish such a feat is the British Empire, which allowed allowed the Europeans or Israelites to colonize virtually the entire world, at this time setting up prosperous new nations everywhere. Even the name England or English comes from the word Angles, which was one of the Anglo-Saxon tribes that invaded Britain. It means the bull or horned one, so England or English means land or people of the bull or unicorn, or in other words, the land and people of Ephraim. So Manasseh had two symbols, the arrow, bow or crossbow, and the diagonal sideways cross. The arrows are again Jacob's blessing of Joseph overcoming everything to eventually rise up. The cross is the same cross where Jacob crossed his arms when he blessed his two grandsons Ephraim and Manasseh. He swapped the blessings, making Ephraim the first and Manasseh the second to come later. The arrow symbols appear a lot in conjunction with lions and eagles, but most notably upon the United States coat of arms. The diagonal cross, of course, is tied in with Ireland and Scotland. It appeared on the Union Jack and then the early Confederate flag with the 13 stars, but also going back to the old Anglo-Saxon kingdoms such as Mercia, it had a diagonal cross as well. So Manasseh had the second birthright. Again, he was promised a double portion, just like Ephraim, and to become a single great nation. That meant that after the British Empire, we'd expect to see a single great prosperous nation, greater than any other European nation. I wonder who that could be. Lastly, Benjamin, he had just one symbol, the wolf. Now this is the prophecy that Benjamin would be a wolf and divide the spoils. The wolf symbol appears on the capital city of Norway's Oslo's coat of arms, and quite a lot of surnames do have wolves upon them. It should be noted that all the apostles except Judas Iscariot were of the tribe of Benjamin, even including Paul of Tarsus, as Christ said he chose them all. Another prophecy was that Benjamin would be a light to Judah. As the apostles awakened their brethren, they spread the gospel amongst many of the Judahites and travelled to the lost tribes, originally just Judah. The apostle Paul first only travelled to European colonies with descendants of Judah, and then to the other lost tribes of Israel all over Europe. Eventually, the gospel spread, reaching the Germanic tribes that were the deported tribes from Assyria, and from there, Christianity kept spreading amongst the lost tribes. So overall, as you can see, we, the Europeans, have the Israelite symbols everywhere. We inherited them from our ancestors. They are all spread out in all our nations, and many of our nations even fit the prophecies exactly. This is because we are the children of Jacob and his 12 sons, the patriarchs. We are the same people as the Old Testament. All the promises that God made were for us, for our people forever. We are now entering a time where we as a whole will finally wake up and realize the truth of who we are. Visit truthvids.net for more information and videos. We're in the end game now, the time of Jacob's trouble, so wake up and start spreading the truth for your people.